National Civil Rights Museum are here. A number of dignitaries are here downstairs as well. There are going to be a number of dignitaries who are going to be offering up their stories, personal stories about Dr. King. Earlier I saw Diane Nash, also of course Congressman John Lewis. A number of folks are going to be here. And that's what's happening. Right now who's talking is Terry Freeman. Terry is the CEO of the National Civil Rights Museum, and so it's going to be a great evening. We've had, of course, a fantastic day, but also the last 3 days, and this really is the last major event of the week, this evening of storytelling. So right now, let's go down to the stage where Terry Freeman, the CEO, is now speaking.
And I want to thank the best staff anyone could ask for. Could you give them a round of applause? I don't want to call them by name.
Keep it on.
Because each
Just like keep it on?
staff
Okay.
member has put their heart and soul into making these events meet the standard and quality that Dr. King's memory and legacy deserve. So again, join me in thanking the board of directors and the staff of the National Civil Rights Museum. I would also like to do some general acknowledgments. We have several former Freedom Award recipients with us this evening. I believe Susan Taylor is here, if she would please stand. Ruby Bridges Hall. Is Joan Trumpauer here with us? Where is she? Okay, she's back there in the back. Sit-ins, freedom rides. And finally, is Reverend Ed King here? Here he is. Please stand up. Do we have any other former Freedom Award recipients in the house with us? All right, well, thank you all for being here with us this evening. When we began planning this commemoration under the theme of where do we go from here, we knew that this event had to be included. We knew that it would be important for you to hear from those who worked in the vineyard with Dr. King, as well as those who continue to fight for freedom and justice today. We knew that it would be important to understand what they gave of themselves and the sacrifices they continue to make. We also knew in this new millennium we would need to have a symbolic passing of the mantle to ensure each of us that we are in good hands. As president of the National Civil Rights Museum, I have the privilege on a daily basis of being able to view the pictures of the young foot soldiers who achieved so much. The pictures of Diane Nash, John Lewis, Marion Wright Edelman, and Jesse Jackson, young people who changed the world. And as I look at those pictures, I think of Bree Newsome and what it must have taken to climb up that flagpole in South Carolina. I ask myself, what motivated Tamika Mallory to call for a women's march? Or for our own Tami Sawyer to take them down 901? Or Quentin James to decide that to have political power, you must have financial resources to support candidates of color and create the collective PAC. These are the new movement makers of our time. And although they are doing this work in the 21st century, it's unfortunate that we still find ourselves fighting the same fight as our icons and elders fought in the 20th century. In the 20th century, hate was clothed in hoods and sheets. Now they prefer polos, khakis, and tiki torches. Bigotry used to hide behind the Jim Crow laws of the South. Now it is represented by the institutional and structural racism that creates resegregated schools, income and wealth disparities for people of color, and incarceration rates that couldn't have even been imagined by Dr. King. My point is simply that our work continues with a new group of young heroes and sheroes who stand on the shoulders of the giants of the movement, and tonight you will hear all of their stories. Like the past year of activities and the events that have occurred this week, none of this could be accomplished without a community of sponsors and donors. Tonight, in addition to our presenting sponsors, who I will introduce in just a moment, we are thankful for the support of AARP, FedEx, Cigna, Nike, SunTrust Foundation, and the Memphis Bar Foundation. Please join me in thanking them for their generosity. Our presenting sponsors for this evening of storytelling are Gold Strike Casino Resort,
Thank you. I rise here before you tonight as a child and product of the civil rights movement that Dr. King and the prolific men and women leaders who marched with him spearheaded across America and the world. But for them, I would not stand before you as I am right now, representing MGM Resorts International, parent company to our Gold Strike Resort in nearby Tunica, and our 77,000 employees. As we all celebrate Dr. King's remarkable life and each reflect on the meaning of his legacy, the question remains this: what are we doing to carry on the unfinished work he left in our collective pursuit of life, liberty, justice, and economic security for all? That is a question not only for us as individuals, but also for the corporate citizens of America. In some ways, the business community has a greater obligation than individual citizens to promote these values because their vast and in some cases multinational economic resources and power uniquely position them to influence America and the world toward human progress. We at MGM Resorts understand that with the privilege of licensure to generate wealth comes the obligation to uphold the constitutional values of equality and justice for all that Dr. King advocated, and to contribute to the economic and social betterment of our communities. For these reasons, MGM Resorts has been an industry pioneer in diversity, inclusion, and corporate social responsibility. As one dimension of our commitment, we have made significant contributions to the National Civil Rights Museum here in Memphis, as well as the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Marcus Garvey declared, "A people without the knowledge of their past history and culture is like a tree without roots." In remembrance of the rich heritage Dr. King has left all of us, the corporate leaders and diversity officers of America should stand together as 1,000 points of light, renewing our focus on equity for all people in our workplaces and in our communities, striving to ensure diversity in all levels of our organizations, and demonstrating excellence in inclusion for all of society to witness. This is our quest and our abiding commitment at MGM Resorts, recognizing, as Dr. King observed, that change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. Together, we all rise. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Pamela Alexander, Ford Motor Company.
Well, good evening, everyone. How are you? On behalf of Ford Motor Company and its philanthropic arm, Ford Motor Company Fund, welcome to an evening of storytelling. What a powerful day it was today honoring Dr. King. I know, yes, we can applaud there. And I know that, is anyone else emotionally just full and just making room for this evening? I know that's where I am. And I know Terry mentioned her staff, but I have to mention them again. I'm on the board, and so I've seen this process as it's gone over the past year plus. So I have some idea of how much work went into it, but I don't think any of us can really imagine how much it took to pull today off. So can we please give them some really strong recognition for what they did today? Thank you. It's very important to Ford to be part of this week's events, both here in Memphis and then later this week and early next week in Atlanta. 50 years, it's a long time, but at the same time, it's not a long time. And I know we've spent a lot of time, both this week and in the recent years, we've had a lot of 50th anniversaries, reflecting on the achievements, the setback, the history, and the legacy. But as so many speakers have said today and even this evening, we do not honor Dr. King if it's about the history. It's about thinking about today, the challenges, the opportunities, the possibilities, and then frankly taking a big old mirror and looking in it and finding out what is my role in making those possibilities a reality as a person, as a corporation, as a community. And I know all of us at Ford, we are committed to being part of that, to making those possibilities a reality. It's very important to us. It's why we have partners like the National Civil Rights Museum. We want to help make that vision that Dr. King saw from the mountaintop 50 years ago, that vision of a beloved community, a reality. We have a ways to go. We've made a lot of progress, but we are committed to being there. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being there with us as we work forward to realize that dream each and every day. So thank you for being here tonight.
Please welcome Dr. Scott Morris, founder of the Church Health Center.
So welcome to Crosstown Concourse. So, on behalf of Crosstown Development, Crosstown Arts, Church Health, and all who live and work in this space, we're pleased to welcome you home. You people actually do live here, don't you? So this really is your home. How cool is that? So this building was built in 1927 to be a Sears retail and distribution center. So during the days of segregation, it was one of the few white-owned businesses in Memphis where African Americans could walk through the front door. It was abandoned in 1992 and left to rot. But it has now come back to a new life, far more noble than its past. Our opening day was the week after Charlottesville. It was a glorious day in Memphis. It was a day to celebrate all that is possible in God's imagination. And as we move forward, we are committed to work in Memphis to live into the beloved community. We are not so naive as to ignore the challenges we have before us, but we believe intensely in a world built on justice, mercy, and the goodness of God. Our rallying cry at Crosstown is that we are better together. Diversity in all its forms makes us stronger. So I invite you to wander through our building tonight to taste what is here. And tomorrow, come back with your sleeves rolled up to help us build a community in Memphis where Dr. King can rest. Welcome to Crosstown.
Frederick Yone.
For the breath of life, I thank my maker. My mama said I came from the hustlers and the shaker. My mind built it on skyscrapers and acres. He said take us back to where we belong. I try to write a song as sweet as the song, and though I still bear arms and wear my heart on my sleeve, even when I feel it, God, I still believe. Breathe the days and read through the maze, and the season's so amazing. Feed them and raise them. The seasons are aging. Earthquakes, wars, and rumors. I want us to get by, cause we're more than consumers. We're more than shooters. We're more than looters. Created in His image, so God lived through us. And even living in this generation of computers, only love, love, love can remove. You go, let's go. Go. Yeah, let's go. Let's go. Let's break it down. Everybody just clap your hands. This side say clap your hands, everybody. Everybody just clap your hands. Down low I said clap your hands, everybody. Everybody just clap your hands. Now break it down like. You better make some noise for me. Goodness gracious.
Frederick Yone and Tyke T. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tamron Hall.
Hello, hi. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible evening. It is my honor, it's my pleasure, it's my responsibility to be here on this day. As we all know, 50 years ago, Dr. Martin Luther King was taken from us on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. The day before, he was here on behalf of the striking sanitation workers to talk about the economic injustice that exists then and exists today. And we wanted to take the opportunity tonight to do something different. We wanted a different way to share this experience, a different way perhaps to call all of us to take action. And we wanted each of us to ask this question: where do we go from here? In case this side of the room didn't hear me, the question is, the great Reverend Jesse Jackson taught me the call and response that gets your attention. And of course, he is here as well this evening. So we wanted to put together this evening of storytelling to join the young, the old, the past, the present, and our future, to ask the very question that Dr. King has asked: do we go into chaos or community? Who are we and what do we become? So it is my pleasure to be part of this incredible evening. It is not lost on me for a second where we are and what we've been called to do. Our panels will be broken up into 3 groups. The first, my friend Michael Eric Dyson, who is here. And he will discuss the resistance, what it takes. That word is on our tongues, but how do we take it from a word into action? I then have the pleasure of moderating the next panel. And my papers are shaking already, as you can imagine, because we will have the opportunity to talk with Reverend James Lawson and Congressman John Lewis together on this stage. And we will discuss the lesson of humility, tenacity, persistence, courage, and love. And finally, our third group will focus on Dr. King's concept of the world house, of our connectiveness, of the groups of people who are here, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, women and men, our connective tissue of humanity. And this panel will be moderated by my beloved friend, April Ryan. So I ask you, in the front, in the back, above us, all the way up, take a look. Look at what is above us. This is the dream of Martin Luther King. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Eric Dyson.
How y'all doing? Everybody all right? Y'all feeling good? You know what time it is. 50th anniversary of the death of the greatest freedom fighter America has ever known. Arguably the greatest American. Thomas Jefferson had an audience because he was a president. Abraham Lincoln had the official imprimatur of the state, but a private citizen from Atlanta, Georgia, changed the world. We are here today to recognize his genius. We saw the tremendous rhetorical ferocity of a hip-hop star out here spitting lyrics, but how about being in your hotel room, sick and tired, raining like cats and dogs, and you don't feel well? The audience might be low, and they call you in your hotel room, room 306, in the Lorraine Motel. And then you get up, get dressed, and go to Mason Temple and give one of the coldest, off the top of the dome speeches ever given. Always say, America, be true to what you said on paper. And here we are living, I'm going to introduce this panel, but you know what time it is. We're living with a man who gets up every morning at 5:30 a.m. talking about a shithole country. We know where the shithole is, beneath his nose and above his chin. He gets up every morning to excrete the feces of moral depravity into a nation he has turned into his psychic commode. Antiquated, adolescent, recalcitrant, arthritic, proud to be unmolested by enlightenment. Can't even be mentioned in the same name as these great freedom fighters we have here today. Diane Nash, Marion Wright Edelman, Jesse Jackson, John Lewis, Clarence Jones, Bernard Lafayette. Stand on your feet and show some respect. And so we celebrate Miss Terry Freeman, the wonderful director of this National Civil Rights Museum. Give her love. And then before I bring them out, on a lonely, desolate balcony in a hotel made really a motel. He was at a white motel first. Negroes criticized him. What's wrong? You don't want to stay with Negroes? Sometimes serving black folk can get you killed. Oh, I know you don't want to hear it. And I'm going to say this before I bring him out. If you used his rhetoric to pave your path to the presidency, and you stood with him in his resurrection, why not come here in Memphis and celebrate his crucifixion? Reverend Jesse Jackson was standing in the courtyard, looking up at the great prophet. 50 years is a long time to live, but to live in the after-memory and the glow of the most exciting rhetorical artists that we have produced, who gave voice to our feelings, our vision, 39 years young. And when the coroner opened his body, said he had the heart of a man 65 years old. The stress killed him. The white supremacy killed him. And in the aftermath of his death, the least we could do is raise up, tell the truth, be fearless in the face of fascist denial, and stand to acclaim his genius in our era. Let me bring out this great panel. We got Mike Coby, an attorney from Birch, Porter, and Johnson. Birch, Porter, and Johnson. Mr. Mike Coby. We have the great Marion Wright Edelman, founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund, a great black woman. We got so many great black women here today. Huh? I mean, I don't want to insult nobody, but when God made a black woman, when God fashioned the incredible authenticity of the unstinting and unstoppable, incontrovertible greatness of his ideal projection, a black woman was at hand. Susan Taylor was one of them. Diane Nash is another one. Civil rights leader and peace activist Bree Newsome, snatching flags like y'all popping collars and realizing the necessity to fight against the evils of white supremacy. Ain't that a trip? They still celebrating the flag of people who lost. But a black football player wants to bend his knees in acknowledgement of the evil that prevails, and they can't even give him a job. Nicole Porter, director of Advocacy for the Sentencing Project, dealing with the serious problem of criminality and criminalizing young black men and women. Let's welcome our panel to the stage right now. Elaine Turner is here. Tami Sawyer is here. Who else? And Coby Smith is here as well. All right, we're going to get right to it.
Okay. They told us to sit on the... You're going to sit off the side now. That's fine. I'm good.
This, as you know, is about storytelling, and our theme for this particular gathering, and let's give a hand for the great Tamron Hall as well, who introduced us. She brought her sister, masquerading as her mother, is here tonight too. Good black don't crack, better black don't even look back. So tonight, what we want to do is to talk about the theme of resistance. And each one of these extraordinary figures embodies the intellectual fortitude, the spiritual courage, and the moral tenacity in the face of opposition. I want to turn to Miss Diane Nash, one of the great leaders of our and subsequent generations. And I want to ask Ms. Nash, in light of the supposed tensions in the civil rights movement between one style with Southern Christian Leadership Conference, with a kind of hierarchy, and Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that had a different understanding of what leadership was about, and yet together with other organizations, you forged such tremendous change in the 1960s and beyond. Tell us what you think resistance is, where you got the courage to resist, and why it's important to keep that tradition alive.
Okay. Well, I'd like to begin by acknowledging Reverend James Bevel.
Amen.
He's now deceased, but he was certainly my partner in most of the things that we did and made a huge contribution. I guess when I went south for the first time and encountered signs that said whites and white only and colored, and felt outraged and humiliated, and when I obeyed those signs, I felt like I was agreeing that I was too inferior to go through front doors and into certain restaurants and libraries and places that the public went. Before we took on countering segregation, we knew that Jim Crow was tough. And we needed to make a decision if we were going to combat it at all, that we were going to do whatever was necessary. So if the road to defeat Jim Crow went through the jailhouse, we were going to go there. If it went to getting beaten up, if it went to even sacrificing our lives, we were going to do that. And I certainly got the courage from, and I think other people did, from each other. The people I worked with were so brave, and so strong, and so committed, and so courageous. I certainly didn't want to let them down. And I think that's the way we felt about each other. So that cohesion and love for each other, I think, is the major factor.
Ms. Newsome, people know of the significant gesture you made in regard to the Confederate flag, but what they may not, amen, but what they may not know is that that grows out of a deep and abiding sense of radical opposition to not only the status quo, but the forces of white supremacy that have seduced others to participate while you made a dramatic gesture to resist. Tell us what the tradition that produced your resistance is about and how you connect that to an earlier generation of resistance.
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, one, from history, from learning about people like Diane Nash, from these amazing people who are on the stage today, but also personally from my family story. I mean, my family was enslaved in South Carolina, so I knew about my own family history. of overcoming or struggling to overcome racism and slavery. You know, I grew up seeing the Confederate flag in South Carolina, so it was never any mystery, you know, what that flag represented. It was raised in 1961 as a statement of opposition to the Civil Rights Movement. They raised that flag not long after the Friendship 9 staged their sit-in in Rock Hill. In the year 2000, they finally agreed to move it from the dome of the Capitol, where it was originally, to the lawn, and at that point they wrote into the law that the flag could not be lowered for any reason unless they had a 2/3 approval from the State House. Then, of course, you flash forward to 2015, we have a white supremacist goes into Mother Emanuel, massacres 9 people, including the pastor of the church, who was also a state representative, just days before being gunned down in his own church, had succeeded in getting body camera legislation passed in response to the Walter Scott case. So when we see, you know, Clementa Pinckney's casket being processed through the streets of Columbia, South Carolina, the United States flag is at half-staff. The state of South Carolina's flag is at half-staff, but the Confederate flag is still at the top of the pole. And that whole moment, that whole visual just encompassed everything that we're talking about when we say Black Lives Matter, when we talk about the total disregard for Black life, or the equating of property to Black life, and oftentimes counting property as worth more. I mean, we saw in Baltimore, there was more concern for the CVS window than for Freddie Gray. In Ferguson, there was more concern for the QT than for Mike Brown. So when we're talking about these systems of white supremacy, it's symbology, it's in education, it's in the issue of voting, it's in all of these things. And so here we are 50 years later, I don't see any separation between the struggle that happened before me arriving here. I'm stepping into a struggle that began long before I came.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Dr. Lafayette, you, along with many valiant soldiers who are here today, worked with Dr. King, and in the last push of the Poor People's Campaign, which was enduring enormous criticism from without and deep skepticism from within, you were there in those last days. In fact, you were in the hotel room with Dr. King when he received the call to go over to Mason Temple. But you also were a visionary, helping to craft the strategy and the policy that would be implemented in terms of trying to reach out to this last element, this last leg of the movement, which is economic inequality. Tell us about your own personal story of resistance, how you came to join that movement, and why it's important to keep that tradition alive 50 years later.
Well, I was very fortunate to be in Nashville at the same time that Jim Lawson was doing the workshops there with Diane Nash and Jim Bevel and John Lewis and others, including Marion Barry, which sometimes we don't mention. But he was the first chairman of SNCC.
Right.
A lot of people don't know that.
Right.
But we learned as if we were in a special military school. In fact, one of the important things that we learned in our training was that you had to stay in control of your emotions. Because in tense situations, when somebody's going to attack you or say something that really upset you, and realize that's their purpose. So what they're doing is trying to provoke you to behave in such a way that they expect. And then they take the advantage. It's like pulling the string on a puppet, okay? And they can pull your string. So we are trained not to allow others to pull our string, that we stay in control. And one of the ways we did that, when we had our first sit-ins in Nashville, it was not a protest. It was a test. So we actually went down and we sat in to see how the others would react. But more important than that, we had to decide how we were going to act. So we got some practice. It's like boot camp in the military. So we were ready and prepared to do that. Martin Luther King's philosophy and his concepts and that kind of thing was shared with us, and we began to embody those things. And there were many people in the workshops, but some were more embodied than others. So what I want to say is that there's no substitute for the training. The leadership in any organization or any group is very much dependent on the quality of the training for leadership.
All right. So, Ms. Porter, the Sentencing Project addresses one of the most persistent forms of inequality that prevails, and we're living in a society where the criminal justice system has been incredibly unjust to so many, among others, people of color, so that the disproportionate concentration of people of color in prison represents, according to Michelle Alexander, a new Jim Crow, and at the very least, the radical inegalitarian politics that have prevailed for the last 50 years. Tell us about why it's important to focus on that particular sliver of the social injustice problem and why that has implications across the board and how you got involved.
Well, you know, yesterday I spent all day in a meeting talking about race and justice. And when folks introduced themselves, they often said that the U.S. is in a much better place today than it is 50 years ago, oftentimes marking the occasion given the day we're commemorating today. And perhaps in a lot of ways we are better off than we were 50 years ago, but all I know is my story. And I'm a kid of the 80s and the 90s. I grew up in North Houston. And when I aged into my late teens, early 20s, all of the young men that I grew up with had been in and out of jail or prison at one point or another. And in fact, I have a twin brother whose name is Nicholas. My parents were really innovative in their naming of us. My name's Nicole. And when my brother got locked up, it politicized me around mass incarceration. I had always been political, even as a high school kid, you know, not doing walkouts, but other sorts of activism throughout high school. And his incarceration triggered that for me. And a lot of the people I work with are directly impacted or have been politicized because their family members have been inside the system. Or I work with folks who are locked up today who are some of the strongest activists and strategists working to challenge mass incarceration on a day-to-day. And it is incredibly important that as we talk about why Black Lives Matter and fight for Black liberation over the next 50 years, that we continue to center the lives of our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated, who have been justice involved, who, if not just for one opportunity, could be any one of us. Right. And we know that from the extrajudicial police killings that have activated organizing over the last couple of years, and we know that from a range of other experiences that have led to people getting involved in the justice system as well.
Right, right. Mr. Smith, as a seasoned veteran of this movement, you hear so much talk, discourse, rhetoric around what, you know, which is an assault upon a younger generation. Because people have amnesia. They forget that older people used to be young. And if they get mad at Black Lives Matter, they forget that SNCC was involved in a very serious fashion in resistance and were demonized similarly. Tell us about your understanding of multi-generational resistance and why it's so important for older people to embrace younger people and for younger people to understand, as Ms. Newsome said, that they're stepping into a moving river of tradition over which they should be washed by it and also to appreciate it. So tell us about the relationship between those two generations, at least.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
I'm suffering from an affliction that I usually do not suffer for, being lost for words. However, we have had the most consistent continuity of any movement ever. The fact is that the people that I derived my knowledge from, the Reverend Jim Lawson, Mike Coby, Dr. King, Bernard Lafayette was one of my heroes too, Bob Moses. There were people always around who were able to deliver to us information about how to survive. My father, my grandfather, all those people contributed to my development. And it was easy for me. I even had a girlfriend who was sister to Elaine Turner, who introduced me to Ida B. Wells. It was that knowledge and that information that let me know that there was a tradition, that I was not alone.
Right. Okay.
I did not have to reinvent any wheel.
That's right. Was she a sister? Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. We'll get you a little water. We'll get you a little water.
When I learned that my grandfather was a Garveyite, and he had gone to New Orleans to protest for Garvey's presence in the country, he told me that when they got there, the police came to break up their meeting. The police raised up their guns. He said, then we raised up ours. We had more than they did.
Yeah.
But now he was a Christian man. He did not.
Right, they're gonna get you some water right there.
Thank you. I had no idea that he was such a militant person.
Right.
My father was also an interesting man. He was a union member and worked out at International Harvest. My father would go out as a steward when their leader would come to town, and they would sleep around his house in order to protect him. So I learned that the idea of continuing the movement in spite of whatever struggle, whatever hardship, whatever potential harm was important. Then when I met Dr. King, the top flew off the bottom. I met a man who was so courageous that he was not ever afraid to confront trouble, danger, a potential disaster. He wasn't a bully of a man. He was just a man who had enough in him to stand up no matter what the pressure.
Okay. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Ms. Sawyer, as a young person engaged in serious challenge to systemic inequity, one of the, I think, really important contributions of younger people within a movement, especially Black Lives Matter, but others as well, is the notion of self-care. Now, you know, a lot of older black people hear that like, huh? What that is? Self-care? We're involved in the movement. We ain't got time to stop on the way to Birmingham to check our blood pressure and to kick back and have a day of mental health. You know, Dr. King, right? But we can joke about that, but the reality is so many people suffered from mental problems in a very serious way. Dr. King, it's no secret, was clinically depressed. Why wouldn't he be? Somebody's trying to kill you every day. That's enough to drive you into deep and profound depression. So tell us about the necessity in the movement of taking note of the need for a kind of ethic of self-care, which is not narcissistic and it's not ego-driven. It's about if you take care of yourself, you can be taking care of yourself for the movement, making sure that what you're doing is a tremendous contribution, and then tell us your story about how you came to resistance as well.
So in this current chapter of the civil rights movement, we've lost so many allies and colleagues to, you know, the symptoms that you're talking about, depression, lack of mental health care, lack of awareness of the trauma. And in a social media world, it's so easy for us to be attacked. I'm sure all of my fellow new leaders up here could talk about the social media attacks, how we get death threats in our inboxes, how we get all kind of attacks that just wear on you mentally. And so it's not like when Martin Luther King received a telegram. You know, I've seen telegrams that Martin Luther King sends. People can oppress us and attack us mentally instantaneously and directly. If you check the Civil Rights Museum's Twitter feed right now today, there are attacks on this entire day, attacking us for wanting to come together in his name. And so it's important to us because it's so intense. And we've watched our brothers and sisters either take their lives because they have no resources and can't take it anymore, and because they didn't feel heard. And that's where self-care that's why it's become prioritized in this movement, because we want to be up here like you all in 50 years and, be able to tell the next generation stories. Thank you. And so we have to take a break. We have to put ourselves first, and that's a hard thing to say and do. I don't know if any of us do it well. I know I don't. And so for me, I came into this movement, into this work here in Memphis, being a Memphian, because I returned home in 2013, and I saw that under the veneer of this new 2000s Memphis was the same poverty, the same systemic oppression that we'd been living under for years, and so I wanted to be a voice for that. And so, thank you. And just like in the introduction of this evening, we talked about this amazing space we're in. I love Crosstown. I work on the 4th floor. But yet, on that same day that the ribbon was cut here and the celebration happened, across town, 7 activists were being arrested for protesting Confederate statues. And so we can't call glorious days and say that that was, the greatest day in Memphis when people were still fighting to be seen and not be oppressed by not just physical structures, but systemic structures. And that's why I'm in this movement, to show the vast inequity that continues to exist 50 years after Dr. King was killed in our city.
Amen. Telegraph versus the Twitter. Although that woman stabbed him in Harlem, that was pretty direct, right? Remember that black woman, Isola Ware Curry? Are you Dr. King? Boom, with the order. Yeah. Remember he told in that last speech, if he had sneezed, he told about the story from the young white girl, and those death threats every day, the palpable sense of devastation. And in each generation, it comes differently, right? Yeah. Because every day, you remember at the end of his life, he was afraid to be in a room with windows, wondering who might assault him. Hiccups that would never cease until he stood up to speak. Imagine having to speak every day with that kind of trauma. And Susan Taylor, who is here, the queen of black America, like my mother, Susan Taylor says that she reminds me of a quote from Gandhi that says, if I don't take care of myself, I really can't take care of you. So that ethic of care is extremely important, and each generation has been traumatized by the vicious ethic of white supremacy that denies us access to our own humanity. That's why we went to Wakanda time and time again. Did y'all go see Black Panther? If you ain't seen it, what? Wakanda forever! Get up in this piece. Back to the lecture at hand. Mr. Smith, as the lightest skinned Negro here.
Mr. Cody.
Cody.
Cody Smith? Yeah.
That's Coby.
That's Coby Smith, and you are?
Mike Cody.
Mike Cody. See, I mistook you for another light-skinned black man. I'm a resist the temptation to ask you to explain what white folk are doing right now. I'm just going to let you off the hook on that. I'm not going to do you like they do black people. Explain everything about Negro history to me right now, Bob. I'm avoid that, but I will ask you this. Obviously, you as a serious and committed person engaged in an act of social resistance, joining your body, your mind, and your spirit with other people of conscience. Tell us what it was like then as a white person involved in a transracial movement for social justice, and why it's one of the things that irked Dr. King, among many others. He said, it ain't the white supremacists, I can deal with them. It's the white moderate that wants us to slow down, be reasonable, puts order above justice. So talk about how you were able to resist that to join a broader resistance for economic and racial equality.
I don't really know. You know, I grew up here in Memphis. I'm 82 years old. Lockdown segregation when everything, I lived 2 miles from this building. Downtown, a black woman could go in a department store and buy a hat or dress, but they couldn't try it on. If I went to the zoo on Thursday, there'd be a big sign that said,
no whites allowed. Couldn't participate in athletics, blacks and whites. And I never was with a peer that was black of my own age until I was out of law school. But during this, so that he could march.
Right.
And the other one was, in my mind, the only person that I can identify as a saint in Memphis, Tennessee, and that's Reverend James Lawson.
Yeah. Where's Jim Lawson?
He'll come back. But Jim got all of us interested in trying to make changes, whether it was the Vietnam War. Jim and I set up a legal services program here in Memphis. Lucius provided the legal work to help people like Dr. King, and you learn from other people. You never stop being a moderate, and a white person looks at other people's problems, like civil rights problems, in an academic way. Unless you're black, or unless you have a child of color, or unless you're married to someone, you can't have that deep empathy that only comes with seeing a person very, very close to you be discriminated against. So it's hard for a white moderate who does not have any real life experiences that way to really become very revolutionary. But I think that what I've heard this weekend and what I know is, in 1968, about 20% of the whites had a favorable opinion of Dr. King. Today, 80 or more percent do. What he said has sort of been forgotten. And he's been made a colorblind icon. I Have a Dream, the mountaintop. But people forget that if the book Martin King wrote in 1967, Where Do We Go From Here? If he came in this room and read what he wanted to do today, his poll numbers would drop from 80 back to 20.
Right, right.
And so what I think we need to do, and it's not just a black problem, it's a problem for Native Americans, for people up in Appalachia, people on opioids, crack, whatever it is. You have got to have what Dr. King called a radical transformation of the American economic system.
Right. Amen. Amen.
There's no other way it'll get done.
We need more white people like you, sir. Amen. Where can we find them? So, Ms. Turner, obviously, given what Brother Coby just talked about in terms of the difficulty of many white Americans to understand the existential, the personal, the psychological damage done because of a radically divided society. White water fountain over here, black water fountain over here. Tell us, in growing up under rigorous apartheid, growing up in a society that literally reminded you daily that you were inferior, that your life didn't matter, that according to the Supreme Court, you had no rights that white people were bound to respect. How does one manufacture the kind of courage and imagination and vision as black people, among many others, to resist that?
You know, the main reason that I and the rest of my family understood that we deserved the best was because of our parents. My great-great-grandmother came over on the ship, Grandma Mandy. We knew about her. We knew about her daughter, and we knew about my grandfather, who was enslaved himself. And we knew we came from a strong people. And so our parents told us about who we were, and we believed them. And they told us that we were as good as anybody else, even though we saw the signs that said, you know, whites only, the signs that said, you know, only white people in the zoo today. And we just had that one day to go to the zoo. We knew better. we had to go to schools across town, pass by 2 or 3 white schools to get to that school. But even in that school, we took pride in it because we were together. As a family, we have a pretty large family, 14 in the family, and sisters and brothers, and we supported each other. So in 1960, after Diane Nash and the other students had sat in Nashville, Marion Barry had just graduated from Lemoyne College, and he was attending grad school at Fisk. And he was involved in the sit-ins in Nashville, and he came back down to Memphis and to encourage the students at Lemoyne College and Owen College to also, they were all white except one, the colored library they called it. So that started what needed to have happened in Memphis. And when I heard about what was happening in Nashville and Greensboro and all of that, we knew that it was time for Memphis to act. And we were right for it as far as making some changes in Memphis. And we did just that. And so when Ernestine and about 40 of her fellow students were arrested in March of 1960 for going to the library, and they were all dressed like we are dressed up here. But they were hauled off into paddy wagons as though they were criminals. And the newspapers called them criminals because they had broken the sacred Jim Crow law of Memphis.
Right.
And they said they didn't want to have any more of this, that we had peace in this city until they disrupted it. So the white community was frantic. The black community was excited, and they galvanized. All of the black lawyers in Memphis came to their defense. The black ministers, the churches opened their doors, and Memphis was excited that there were changes taking place. So after Ernestine came home and reported of all of the things that happened in her arrest, we knew that the rest of us would be involved, and we started sitting in every day. So we were those foot soldiers, Brother Lafayette mentioned about. We were trained by Reverend Lawson in the basement of Centenary United Baptist Church with the nonviolent workshops. So we knew how we were to behave as we marched and as we sat in. So those were very important things. So we didn't have a lot of violence during the sit-ins here in Memphis because of that. And yes, it took some toll on us, but because of a strong family base, every night we would have some, I guess, some deep processing sessions. Every night we gather around the dining room table and we talk about what happened that day. And then what we were going to do the next day, because we were right out there every day. And yes, we got arrested many times. They called us the most arrested civil rights family in Memphis, the Lee family. Two of my sisters are over there, Brenda and Peggy Jane are over there now, and so there were 7 sisters, and then of course 7 brothers too, but we were all involved. It seemed like the girls had more time to sit in, but that's how we spent our entire summer vacation. And then between classes at Lemoyne College, we would go downtown and picket and sit in and whatever. So even though those were stressful times, we had a base, and our parents prayed for us, and they knew that we would be all right. And we had people like Reverend Jim Lawson and Maxine Smith and Vasco Smith, all of those people protecting us, and Reverend Billy Cowes, and all those people were around us and surrounded us. And yes, whatever needed to be done, we were out there. We were willing to put ourselves on the line. And of course, there were repercussions. You know, it didn't matter. After I finished Lemoyne College, I planned to teach school, but they had other plans for me. I was blacklisted in Memphis, so I had to leave the state to get a job. But that's just a small price. Look at the price that Dr. King paid, and all the others.
Yes, ma'am.
That's nothing. That's absolutely nothing.
Yes, ma'am.
So we had to, after the sit-ins and after I left Memphis, I did have a little trauma, and I didn't even want to talk about it because I didn't know how Memphis was going to receive me when I came back. So it took me a while. So I realized there was some stress there. Right. However, during the time that it was happening, it was a job, it was a mission, it was a passion. There was no way that we were going to stop until those laws were changed.
All right. Amen. Marion Wright Edelman. Something about a three-name black woman. And you are one of the most iconic presences among activists, highly cerebral and yet able to translate your intellectual credentials into care for the least of these, and often in unpopular fashion. So as a woman who worked right beside Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, and then generated out of your own passion a serious ministry to young people, without her efforts, so many children of color would be lost in a pipeline without advocacy. Tell us where, first of all, you found your particular brand of courage to stand up and speak, and tell us why you had the prescience, the foresight to really focus on children as part of your vision about change.
I had great parents. My daddy was a Baptist minister, and my mother was the best organizer you could ever think of. And they made it very clear by the way they lived that God did not make two classes of children, and that every child was sacred, and that while the outside world said we were not as good as white kids, that wasn't so. So I became a rebel at 4. Even before I could not read very well. I went up to Belk's department store with one of my public school and Sunday school teachers, and I didn't read too good that time, and I was thirsty, and I went to drink from the white water fountain. And my poor teacher almost had a stroke. And she came and she jerked me away, and she said, "You can't drink there," but I didn't understand why, and she pointed out that this was white and this was black. I did psyche home, and I told my parents what had happened, and they made it very clear that it wasn't about me, it was about them. But then from then on, I would go throughout, anytime I saw a black-white child, I would switch the signs. It gave me just such second message from my parents and community co-parents about the sacredness of children, that if you see a problem, don't ask why somebody doesn't do something. Ask, what can I do to solve that problem? And so old man Reddick, we now know, we didn't know the name Al Timeless when he was growing up, but he began to wander the streets. He was a distinguished old man and preacher. And so my mom and daddy built a home for the aged across the street. And all of us from our church and all of us children had to cook and clean. Now, we sure didn't like it at the time. But that's how we learned that it was our responsibility to take care of needy people who were older than we. And I found my mother cooking 3 meals a day in her 80s for people, all of whom were younger than she was, because we ran a home for the aged throughout her existence. I had 12 foster sisters and brothers. There is no issue I work with at the Children's Defense Fund that didn't occur in my childhood. The migrant family that had an accident in front of the church, we all ran out. The migrant family was black, the truck driver who hit him was white. The ambulance came, white drivers saw that the black family was injured, but that the white truck drivers weren't. They drove off. You never forget something like that. Little Johnny Harrington down the street jumped off the bridge because there was no swimming pool. White kids had a big swimming pool. Jumped off the bridge, broke his neck. I later learned that the creek where black folks fished and swam was the hospital sewage outlet. It's amazing any of us are alive today. I didn't swim there, but the problem is white kids had a pool. We had this infested thing. And little Johnny Harrington, 2 doors down, another little boy, stepped on it, lived with his grandma, stepped on a nail, didn't know about tetanus shots, died when he was 9. And I remember playing for the funeral when I was 12 or 13. Every issue I work on comes comes out of my childhood. But the important thing was that the adult response to us to remind me I was sacred, I could make a difference, and I had to make a difference. And while our hand-me-down books were there in the schools, we always had books before we had a second pair of shoes in our house. We read, and we knew who the great role models were in our community. Dr. Mays had to come and stay with us because there was no place to stay. Ellington Hughes got put off of a train in Churchill, South Carolina, at a white minister's house. He was on his way to Atlanta University. The white man opened his door, saw Langston Hughes standing there, and he said, "I'm on my way to Atlanta, and my friend gave me your number. I'm going to stay here tonight." He said, "No, you're not." He put him in a car, drove him to my hometown, took him to the principal's office. The principal's wife came and saw him sitting there and said, "You can be who I think you are." And he said, "Yes, I am, and I'm staying at your house tonight." And she immediately said, "Would you talk to my students?" And he said, "No, I got to be at Atlanta University at X time tomorrow, but I'll come back." And he came back, and he read to black students in this little southern town. And we always knew that we were as smart as anybody else, and all the best role models. I went to hear Mary McLeod Bethune at Benedict College when I was about 9. I had never seen a black woman command a room of men. And she really knew what she was talking about. And she told stories about how she would go into white dressing shops and try on their hats and say, when they tried to resist, that I am Mary McLeod Bethune. Don't you know who I am? I said, "Boy, she was fat." And when she went to the White House and somebody called her auntie, when she was walking up to go see Mrs. Roosevelt, she went over to him and said, "Now, which one of my siblings are you from?" Great role models, great examples, people who said you can make a difference and change things. And the last words of my father before he died is, "I was 14, don't let anything get between you and your education. And then make sure you give back. You give back." And so I feel like the luckiest person in the world to have been exposed to great parents, to great role models, to great community co-parents. And so that's what we owe our children. And we need to be telling them that they can do anything, change anything. They don't do what we tell them to do, they do what we do. And if we read, they read. If we spend money on nothing, they're not going to spend money on nothing. If they see, and I loved my community co-parents. We were community property. And if we did something, everybody would take responsibility for making sure our parents knew about it.
Right.
But it's the good role models, the good books, the values that were reflected, the education. And I used to sort of hate one thing most every year was being driven to Columbia, South Carolina, to the auditorium where Mordecai Johnson would come once a year, and he would speak for 4 hours with an intermission on the hardest chairs you ever did see. But you know, osmosis.
Yeah.
Osmosis and exposure. So the bottom line is we don't have a child problem, we have an adult problem. And we really need to get our acts together and to tell children that they can be and do anything, because they do exactly what we do, not what we tell them to do. And I want to just say 2 things to all of us here tonight. I'm not a storyteller, but I just feel...
You telling some great stories. You telling some great stories.
But I want to give you a couple of facts. This is the 50th anniversary, as we know, of the Poor People's Campaign. And it wasn't a failure. And all those folks on food stamps, WIC, school lunch, they should thank them poor people in the mud. There was a lot of follow-up, and we have a health safety, a nutrition safety net that would not have happened had we not made hunger visible, but you also had to have somebody who followed up on it. And so that has happened. This year, I want to do, and we're going to announce shortly, and you all got to help, because it is a disgrace that the black child, after all of this sacrifice in the civil rights movement, is the poorest child in America. That's your problem. That's our problem. That's America's problem. And so we're going to announce a poor children, not a poor children's campaign, an in-child poverty campaign.
Right.
In honor of Dr. King and Robert Kennedy, we should not have 13.1 million poor children, but we can do it, and we can end child poverty. You can't help children without helping their parents, and we have been able to pass 40, 50 laws to expand health care and nutrition and education in early childhood under the rubric of children and preventive investment. Let's give our children a break. And the last thing I want you to understand, we've got to stop the gun violence children are being killed by every day. And I want you to go away from here. I never get used to this. When we started something about 25 years ago, we decided to do focus groups because I've got to figure that 55.6% of all black children are being born to never married mothers. And I said that can't be so because that would guarantee the poverty of the next 2 generations of children. In our community, it was so. But then, thank God, we decided we needed to go and do some focus groups. I thought I knew what the answer to these things were. Don't think you know nothing unless you're out there in the community talking and relating to children. And we did these focus groups of both black parents and black children, and to my absolute astonishment, the leading concern of black parents and kids was gun violence. They didn't think their children were going to live to adulthood. I had a mother say to me from Chicago that, you know, she comes home pregnant, I know how to take care of babies. She comes home dead, I don't. And so we have to listen. We have not been seeing and listening to our children. So I want to leave you with one figure, that you need to figure out what we are going to do about this. But between 1963 and 2016, which is the latest data, and we do an annual child gun violence campaign report, 65,947 black children and teens have been killed by guns. That's 16 times more than all of the recorded lynchings of black people between 1877 and 1950. Where are you? Where are you not seeing your children who are terrified before school, after school? Where are your freedom schools to give them some place off the streets and connected to good role models? And so I want to just, on this campaign, where we're celebrating Dr. King and Robert Kennedy and the Poor People's Campaign, why don't we come together as a community and say we're going to end child poverty and the scourge of violence, and let our children know that they are loved and cared for, and nobody's going to love them more than we do. And so I'm really going to challenge you. Let's remember them, not with these kinds of forums, wonderful, but let's remember them in creating that next movement that's going to give every child hope and education and safety and enough to eat and a place to sleep. And this is movement time, you all, and so let's really do honor the people we're celebrating here. But you got to do it.
Beautiful. How are we doing on time? We're finished? We're done? Do we have time? Where's Miss Freeman?
You're way over. Thank you.
No, we're over. That's all right. Let's give it up for Mike Cody, Marion Wright Edelman, Bernard Lafayette, Diane Nash, Bree Newsome, Nicole Porter, Tami Sawyer, Coby Smith, Elaine Lee Turner. Give it up for this great group.
mic on? Is the mic on? Yes. It's on?
Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me in the back?
I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
Dr. King told me in his dream, one day this nation will live out its creed. Do what you say and you say what you mean. Justice for all and for all liberty. We know freedom ain't free. It comes with sacrifice, you gotta pay a price. King lost his life. Commitment and vision and people that's willing to defend their children, put them in positions, live better than how we live. We gon' sit in at lunch, we gon' boycott them buses and walk with my fists and head up. Look, I'm raising a son, he gotta learn. Never settle for less than you deserve. Boy, you stand like a man. Walk like a man. If it's what you believe, then you talk like a man. I've seen the promised land. Your dogs and your hoses won't hurt us. We marching in purpose for certain. Before I let a man tell me my worth, I stop working. Before I let another man tell me my worth, I stop working.
Something is happening in Memphis, something is happening in our world.
What am I supposed to tell my wife? I work day and night, she come home and can't cut on the lights. And my baby need new shoes, my son need new clothes. They come home from school, ain't no food on the stove. And I'm trying to hold on, but these wages that I'm making, they won't make it at all. Robbing Peter so I can pay Paul. Two of my brothers died in the truck in the city, said tough luck. Which means more, us or the trash we pick up?
On some positions, it is necessary for the moral individual to take a stand that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but he must do it because it is right. Somewhere we must see that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I have fought now too long and too hard against segregated public accommodations to end up at this point in my life segregating my moral concern.
I'm a man. I got big hands and big plans and big dreams. I stand on both feet, not both knees. Only when I'm praying, and I ain't begging no man. You not gonna play with me. You gon' pay me what you owe me, cause $1.60 an hour won't empower me. I can't walk proudly off that salary. I can't feed my family, I got bills too. My wrist still do just cause I'm black. That's right, that's a fact, but I'm a man too and I work hard. Do a damn good job, I give my job my all and I want all that I'm supposed to get. Plus benefits and I deserve it because I earned it. And no, I am not perfect, but before I let you tell me what I'm worth, bet I stop working.
And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people
Ladies and gentlemen, Lil Buck and King Dre. Please welcome back Tamron Hall.
Thank you. Are you enjoying this evening? Are you taking life notes? This is the, Oprah calls it the master class. This is something past that. So now we move to the part of our program where we talk about how you make a plan. And when plan A doesn't work, what about plan B, C? And when you find yourself at plan Z, do you keep on going? The architect of the nonviolent resistance, the man who wrote the blueprint for the plan, and the giant who executed it beautifully. Our next panel. We often hear people don't need an introduction. Well, this is gospel. Neither of these civil rights icons needs me to say anything more than their name. Can I please get you on your feet to welcome to the stage the great Congressman John Lewis. And remain on your feet, ladies and gentlemen, for the man who is the blueprint, the creator, the architect of it all, Reverend James Lawson. Please stay on your feet and give these men the honor they so gratefully have earned from all of us here. We're going to get right to it because there is no time to waste. If you've watched the news, if you've read a paper, you know the time is now. Congressman, let's talk about where we are. Millions of people around this country marched in defiance against what they see are gun laws that are not serving the people. Where are we today as it relates to the ability to sustain a movement, to keep it going 50 years after Dr. King's assassination?
Well, thank you very much. I'm honored to be here tonight, to be with you, to be with my teacher, my friend, my brother, Jim Lawson. My philosophy is very simple. When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation to say something, to do something. You cannot afford to be quiet. I think we're going to continue to go forward. These children, these young people, the women of America, but especially the young people going to get us there. I am very hopeful and very optimistic that these young people will be the leaders of the 21st century.
Reverend Lawson, seeing what we've witnessed, as Congressman Lewis said, these young people, the women, the young women on this stage today that are carrying the lessons that you taught Dr. King, that you taught Congressman Lewis, how does it make you feel to see those very tools that you came back with implemented?
You want me to speak the truth, or you just want me to talk?
The truth and nothing but the truth, so help us God.
Well, number one, I'm going to say, my observation is that most activism in the United States today is the activism of the USA and is largely cultural activism.
What do you mean by that?
I mean by that the lessons from the Rosa Parks King movement, which is a separate entity from what's called the Civil Rights Movement, was a different kind of movement. It was a movement that recognized, in the first instance, that each one of us had power in the very gift of life, and that we had to use the gift of life, that's a precious gift from creation. We have to use that gift of life and exploit it on the noble sides of humanity, to learn to be as alive as we could become, to discover that with the gift of life is the gift of love, and that love is the energy of the universe and is the creative force of the universe, and that if we want to have a struggle, then movement must come out of that first. It cannot come out of a culture of violence. It cannot come out of a culture that has for too long pretended to be a land of the free and a home of the brave, while doing the most horrible kinds of things and developing a torturous history that has poisoned the airways in the United States in ways that we do not know. And then in addition to that, if we use the struggle that comes out of the gift of life, the gift of love, the gift of truth, that has to be essentially a nonviolent movement. And a nonviolent movement requires a sense of reason that says, if you want social change, you have to be and you have to do the things that produce social change. If you want justice, you must become just people. A struggle for justice must be itself a justice struggle. If you want freedom and access, then your movement must not reflect the enemies of human life, but must reflect equality and liberty and the dignity of all life.
Yes. And
So
Congressman
there's no alternative to that. You cannot overcome wrong with doing wrong. You cannot overcome evil with evil. As Gandhi said it very well in the words of Jesus, an eye for an eye, soon everyone is blind. A tooth for a tooth, soon everyone is blind. You can't get a new society by planting the seeds of the old society. If you want a new society, you have to plant the seeds that produces a new society. Jesus of Nazareth, and I say that name without all the dogma wrapped around him, insisted that you cannot get grapes from a briar bush.
Yes. Well,
You have to get grapes from a grapevine.
so how do we today get that love, the resistance, the humanity back into the movement? I
Well-
think if you'd ask anyone here, are they a just person, they would say yes.
One of the problems of our society is the fact that we are romantic science of society. We think every generation is going to change us, but we mold every generation with straight up and down USA culture. So how do you get a new world from a new generation using the tactics of the society in which they live?
What is the answer, Congressman?
well-
Lewis? What is the answer, Reverend Lawson?
The high school movement has a good beginning. That is, they know that enough is enough, and they want to see, they want to have the capacity of a society where they can operate learning across their years, especially as young people, in safety, without the violence, without the guns.
Congressman.
So that's a good goal. I like the goal.
Well, Jim Lawson has been my teacher.
Yes.
He's been my leader. When I was very young, had all my hair and a few pounds lighter, this man imbues me with the teaching of Jesus, the teaching of Gandhi. My advice for the young people today is to study the movement, read the literature, watch the films, the videos, and accept nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. When we were beaten, arrested, and jailed, we accepted it. During the 60s, I was beaten and left bloody, unconscious. I thought I was going to down that bridge. I thought I saw death during the Freedom Rise in 1961. When black people and white people can be seated together on a Greyhound bus or a Trailway bus, leaving Washington, D.C., to travel through Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. We were on our way to New Orleans. And Jim Lawson and others of us were arrested. We went to jail. More than 400 people, black and white, went to jail in Mississippi. But we didn't strike back. We didn't give up. We didn't give in. We kept the faith. And our action led to the desegregation of public transportation all across the American South. So when people say nothing has changed, I feel like saying, come and walk in my shoes. I will show you.
Yes. And those shoes are impossible to fill.
We'll come a distance, but I agree with Jim. Somehow, in some way, we got to accept the way of peace, the way of love, the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence as a way of living, as a way of life. As a congressperson, I don't vote for military spending. We have enough bombs and missiles and guns to destroy this planet. We need to spend some of our limited resources on taking care of basic human needs.
When you hear from the young people who are on this stage, when you hear them, and I watch them come up to both of you asking to sit down and just provide them some advice, the blueprint hasn't changed. What worked 50 years ago can work today, but they feel under siege. You heard them say, you go on social media, they're attacked with words, not with sticks as you were, but still with a hostility that's defeating. How do they keep going? And how do they keep from feeling ignored when the cameras show up for predominantly white protests and their voices are deemed riots when they protest?
I had an opportunity to meet with many of these young people, to march with them. When the student march took place in D.C. around our nation, in the city of Atlanta, they asked me to march with them. And the young man, a young student that introduced me, you said our next speaker was the youngest speaker on August 28, 1963. That's the March on Washington. And today, he's the oldest speaker. We have to identify with the hopes, the dreams, and aspiration of these young people. And let them lead. They will get us there.
Reverend Lawson, when they say, yes, they will, pass the torch to the next generation, what does that mean to you?
I didn't hear the first part of your...
When you hear people say it's time to pass the torch to the next generation, what does that mean to you? How is that done? Is that spending more time?
Is that done?
Yes, sir.
one of the ways it's done is by young people putting themselves in a position where they can hear and feel and study and debate over some of these struggles. I have had the experience in the last 15 years of teaching undocumented students at University of California, Los Angeles, any number of whom, because of the sit-in campaigns of students, the Freedom Ride, and other such struggles, began to study and wrestle with them. And the DREAM Act people 10, 12 years ago began to organize, and they represent students, undocumented, who have taken hold of many of these ideas and disciplines and work and created one of the important nonviolent struggles of the last 20 years. However, they've made a fatal mistake. That fatal mistake is that they listen to the pleas of their elders, not Kent Wong or Jim Lawson. They listened to the pleas of their elders who said, the way to get recognition and the legislation for undocumented people is to go to Congress and do it through Congress. And of course, Congress moves today all the time because of the thousands of lobbyists from the war industries, from the commercial industries, from Wall Street, from the Pentagon, from pharmaceutical agencies. So Congress can't hear the pleas of people because there are so many lobbyists who clutter up every congressional office. So if young people are going to get their attention, or if movement is going to get their attention, then you have to, in fact, create a struggle where today you put 1,000 or 2,000 people into the streets of Memphis or Washington, D.C., and next year you put 1 million. You interrupt the agenda of the status quo in such a fashion that they have to listen to a new agenda and are willing. They are busy with their own agenda. And nonviolent struggle around the world over the last 110 years has constantly put on the table the agenda of a new people, whether in Poland or South Africa, over and over again. They haven't gone to the governments and the legislators to do it. They have rather created their own demands, and then with the movement create the power that becomes a new entity in the mix. And that forces then the old powers to move over and to make adjustments and to make some changes. That's how we got all of the legislation of the 60s.
And here we are with a man who's been on both sides of that equation.
All the bills that people brag about, the media never, in celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Bill of 1965, never says that that wasn't on the mind of the president or the Congress or the lobbyists. But because of the Selma Montgomery March, because of the Freedom Summer, because of the Birmingham campaign, because of the Albany, Georgia movement, because of the Freedom Ride and the sit-in campaign, there was an awakening so that that bill could be passed.
Yes. And Congressman Lewis, you've been on both sides now. You've been the young person.
That isn't rocket science, but it is social science that Gandhi said is the only way to bring about social change of any kind of power or effectiveness. That's what King represents.
And Jim, some of the presidents that we had saw that. Lyndon Johnson said,
absolutely.
Lyndon Johnson said, if you want a voting rights act, make me do it.
Yes.
And we made him do it.
John Kennedy was asked by various people and organizations, including the Civil Rights Movement and the Parks King Movement, for a civil rights bill that was inclusive. He said it couldn't be done. But because of the Birmingham campaign and the Washington March, he changed his mind in less than four weeks. He changed his mind in less than 6 weeks and said and introduced a civil rights bill that is called the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. He said he was going to do it after he was reelected. But because of the campaigns in Birmingham and elsewhere, and there were more than 1,700 city demonstrations of different kinds, in addition to the Birmingham campaign and the Washington March. The net result was John Kennedy was persuaded to introduce the bill in 1963. That's power. That's power of the people.
Yes.
And it can happen again and again. And of course, Congress and the lobbyists and Bank America all try to persuade us to be conventional with the system that is. But the system that is fundamentally rotten. And a rotten system has to have some people who have the courage to say so and to organize to change the rot to rightness and maturity of spirituality and character that will allow the newness to emerge. I mean, that's the reality.
In addition, Cameron, we have to use the power of the vote. I've said on many occasions that the vote is the most powerful non-violent instrument or tool we have in a democratic society, and we have to use it. And too many of us fail to use it. Now, you may recall, and Jim will recall, that the Democratic members of the House of Representatives wanted the Speaker of the House to bring forth a comprehensive bill to deal with gun violence, and he refused to do it. So we had a sit-in. My colleagues came to me and said, John, what should we do? We met in my office, and we planned and planned. We decided at a certain time, on a certain day, we would have a sit-in in the well of the House. The first time in the history of our country that members of Congress occupied the floor of the House for more than 26 hours. All Democratic members and almost every Democratic senator came over and joined us. And we may do it again. We may do it. Not just when it comes to gun violence, but we have more than 800,000 dreamers. These young people came here as little children. And we are not kind to them. We need to set them on a path to citizenship. And we may have to turn the Congress upside down and America upside down, as Dr. King said, to set it right side up until we get action.
You've been on both sides. You've been the young person ready to turn Congress upside down, and now you're a member of Congress.
Well, since I've been in Congress, I've been arrested 5 times. And I'm probably going to get arrested again for something. and it's okay.
Yes.
And you go and you try to do everything in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, but you have an obligation to disturb the order of things.
Do you see the frustration in the young people who are trying to figure it out, who know right from wrong, who know the injustices, whether it's the disproportionate number of black men who are incarcerated, the economic disparities, the game feeling like it is still heavily weighed against you, but not knowing, maybe it's through us not spreading the history in a way that connects, I don't know, that they can sustain the movement through the very plan that was put in place when you were a boy, getting advice from Reverend Lawson.
Well, when I was much younger, Jim was working with an organization called the Fellowship
Reconciliation.
Reconciliation. And he had a little comic book.
The what?
You had a comic book.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
Martin Luther King
Montgomery bus boycott.
and the Montgomery story.
That's right.
And we read that little book.
That's right.
We digested.
That's right.
It taught us everything. Diane Nash will tell you, it prepared us, and we were ready. We were ready. We have been imbued. We were ready to march into hell's fire.
And that was one of the few pieces of material that we had relevant to the times in which we live, a comic book story of the Montgomery bus boycott. And I used it all over the South. I passed it out in my travels to my work in 58, 59, 60. And it told the story very effectively. And it told the story as an example of what nonviolent struggle can do. I want John and Tamarin to just inject something. That is to say that at this moment, we, the people of the United States, are headed towards re-electing Donald Trump because in 2020, the reason is that we are playing his game. And you know, that's where I think sports is such a great model for struggle, because no basketball team in the recent March Madness went onto the floor planning to play the opponent's game. The teams that came out on top and won the most victories during that whole month of March were the teams that went in on the floor geared to make the opponent play their game. You have to have respect for our opponents. And one of the ways you respect your opponent is that you know that the opponent plays his game better than you can play his game. And if you want to lose, you always play the opponent's game. If we, the people of USA, manage to elect a new president in 2020, it will be the accident of history and not the way in which we behaved in the last 4 years or today in 2018. We better find a different way of opposing all that Trumpism represents.
What do you see as the way? What is the game we should be playing?
Well, for an example, I don't watch a lot of TV news, but I do watch from time to time certain TV commentary shows. And for the last year and a half, or a year and 4 months, if you see a commentary film, commentators talking about any issue, over and over again, in the background is going to be a picture of President Trump. Almost all the time. The one I watch the most is MSNBC. I also watch occasionally CNN. Sometimes I switch back and forth when I'm going to do it. And all the time, they're reporting the news, and a picture of Trump is going to be in most of the TV pictures all the time. I know of no better way for him to be reelected than the news media to keep talking about any issue, and there's Trump in the picture. There he is. Every Twitter. Well, the media is going to re-elect President Trump for the U.S. people by the way in which they report this time, at this moment, what's going on in our society. You mark my word. Mark my word.
Congressman Lewis, looking forward to the midterm elections, and no matter who ends up in control of Congress, the reality is the issues that face our communities. And what I mean by that, not just black, people of color, people who live below the poverty line, people who are marginalized. How do they empower themselves no matter who is in control of Congress or who sits in the White House?
We have power, and we need to use the power. We need to use it. So many of our people of color, African American, Latinos, Asian American, Native American, hundreds and thousands and millions of whites. We have power, but we don't use it. And with social media today, we should be able to do more than we are doing. We hadn't heard of the internet. Facebook. What is that? And we had more than probably 500,000 people, maybe at the March on Washington in 1963. I think it was an undercount. It said 250,000. We didn't have social media when we marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday. But we changed America. People couldn't stand to see people being beaten down. They couldn't stand to see people be trampled by horses, tear gas and bullwhips. So they changed. We have to create another powerful period of nonviolent direct action. And we can do it. I'm convinced we can do it. Put hundreds and thousands and millions of people in the streets. Why do we have all these members in Congress today deciding they're not going to run? The handwriting is on the wall. We're going to take the House of Representatives back, and if we work, we're going to take the Senate back. I'm going to work my butt off to see that it happens.
And Reverend Lawson, I'll give you the last word on this, as we may see a change in the makeup of Congress. Ultimately, what you started out the beginning of your message was humanity, finding that voice within all of us that can reach in a nonviolent way to affect change. You said to me, do you want me to tell you the truth? So I'll ask you today, do you believe that we are on the verge with the young people, with where we are we on the verge of recreating what you created 50 years ago?
No. Say it directly. We, the people of the USA, really do not have a political party. We may have bits and pieces here and there and yonder. I consider John one of my congresspeople and a number of others. We have bits and pieces, but we do not have a political party. If we are to regain a political party that moves in the directions that the country was moving in, we, the people, are going to have to organize from a nonviolent perspective and create campaigns in city after city that helps to forge a new party, a new Democratic Party maybe, that will do our will, that will look to our interests. Look, sisters and brothers, Harvard University produced a study of the costs of the Iraq War. I think that report was issued about maybe 2 years ago. Harvard University study indicated we have spent $6 trillion for the Iraq War. $6 trillion for the Iraq War. Now, if we, the people, want Head Start and quality education for every boy, every girl, everywhere across our country, we're going to have to be in the streets to see to it that no more $6 million trillion are going to be spent for war, but they're going to be spent on quality education, quality housing, on non-discriminatory economics, on the equality of economics across the board. I maintain that our present economic system is a plantation capitalist system, ideologically and structured. It is aimed at the gathering of wealth by the plantations. It is aimed at saying that working people, working families do not need to have sustainable incomes and steady and stable work. It says that they are more like slaves and do not deserve to have living wages. That's plantation capitalism. The fact that we have 160 million people at the bottom half of our population who do not have the wealth of the property of the 3 wealthiest men in the United States is in itself an indication that our economy is from top to bottom rotten. 160 million people do not deserve to be at the bottom of the ladder on food stamps and unable to support their children. Shelter insecurity, work insecurity, food insecurity, medical insecurity. That's the deliberate plan of the economy, though many of the decent people who are in that economy would say that's not what they wanted. But good intentions without good methods will lead to hell, not to heaven.
You asked for the truth, we got the truth. There you have it.
Good intentions is the road to hell, rather than the
There
road
you
to
have it, Congressman.
Good intentions have to have good ideology, good structures, good movements, good attitudes across the board. If they
Across
don't
the
have
board.
them, we can't do it.
Before we turn it over to April for the next panel, I will ask Congressman Lewis to end it on this, which is where we started. Where do we go from here?
Well, I deeply believe and I feel that we can humanize America and create an America that is at peace with itself, where no one is left out or left behind because of their race or because of their color. But what we need in America is what I called back in the 60s a nonviolent revolution. A revolution of values, a revolution of ideas. I've said to people all the time that you must never get lost in a sea of despair. You have to continue to believe that we can do it, we can overcome. It may take a few days, maybe a few years, but we will get there, and I believe that. I've seen people who lived in fear. They were afraid, just living afraid. But I also have seen people grow up while they're sitting on lunch kind of stools, or while they are marching from Selma to Montgomery. And these same people, or their children, will lead us. They will help create the beloved community. But we must create a society that respects the dignity and the worth of every human being. And we don't do it with missiles and guns. We do it with teaching people to be human. Can we be a little more human? Can we just love everybody and not hate anybody? As Dr. King said, hate is too heavy a burden to bear. The way of love is much better for all of us. Thank you.
Let's again thank these great men for their wisdom then, their wisdom now, and their words that will live forever.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome April Ryan.
Good evening. I know we have a late hour, but we've got one last dynamic panel. Good evening. Take a seat. Take a seat. Take a seat. I know you enjoyed today. I would like my panelists to come up on stage. Because of the lateness of the hour, we're going to give it to you fast, and you're going to take it easy and slow and listen. I'm April Ryan, White House correspondent for the American Urban Radio Networks, also a CNN political analyst, and we're going to talk about the legacy of Dr. King globally, the reach globally, connectively, black, white, Jew, Gentile, Protestant, Catholic, Westerner and Easterner in this climate. And on stage with me is a dear friend, Reverend Jesse Jackson. And if we're going to have this panel by ourselves, that's what we're going to do. So guys, take a seat. I would love for all of my other panelists to come on stage, and I'll introduce you. Come on, all the panelists, yes. Gina Belafonte, Yadon Israel, Quentin James, Clarence Jones, and is my friend Tamika Mallory in the house. Tamika is here. All right. So we got this great panel. And I want to start off this discussion. I want to start off this discussion in a very meaningful way. I mean, today, the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I would like to ask those in the upper tiers and on the sides if you could give us this moment. Shh. It works, yes. The 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let's set the time. We remember those moments in time where we felt like our hearts and our minds were ripped from our bodies. That was one of those moments. You can remember where you were. The nation was coming together, trying to bridge a divide, trying to work together in the midst of injustice and inequality. That was 50 years ago, and in 2018, what are we talking about? S-hole nations. What are we talking about? Putting military troops on the border, the southern border. What are we talking about? Banning our Muslim brothers and sisters from coming into this nation. So where do we go from here, and how does Dr. King's message resonate 50 years ago to 2018? And I'm going to start with one of those foot soldiers, Reverend Jesse L. Jackson. Reverend Jackson, talk to us. I mean, we are at a global age. We can see things by social media and find out what's happening, but we still have something missing, that bridge of love to heal the divide. What's going on, and what should we do?
It seems to me that the context of our struggle matters very much. That no one has mentioned the name of Winnie Mandela, who died this week, will be funeralized, state funeral in South Africa next week. And somehow the co-generation of our struggles deserves the acknowledgement of Winnie Mandela's contribution as a woman, as a freedom fighter. I wish I would give Winnie Mandela a big hand, please. Winnie Mandela. Second, tonight at 6 o'clock, Linda Brown's funeral was in Topeka, Kansas. Linda Brown's funeral was in Topeka, Kansas tonight. And I called her relatives seeking why tonight, and they didn't realize that was a celebration April the 4th in Memphis. The funeral is tonight, and the private funeral is tomorrow morning. That's why I could not make it. But I bring Linda Brown for a couple of reasons. Sister Taylor, number one, I once asked Mrs. Parks, tell me personally, why didn't you go to the back of the bus given the risk you were taking? You could have been thrown off the bus, you could have been run over. She said, one, I thought about Emmett Till, and I couldn't go back. He had been killed August 28th. But more than that, she and Fred Gray had been meeting for 6 months to test the 54th Supreme Court decision featuring Linda Brown. And the big victory was not the boycott of 55, it was the legal decision of 56. If we leave out Thurgood Marshall and leave out Linda Brown, we leave out the legal underpinning of all the rest of what we did was a reaction. Rosa Parks was a reaction. The 42-year-old one was a reaction to the 9-year-old girl's case in Topeka. Dr. King emerged out of the struggle, highlighted by Rosa Parks. So the boycott was a reaction to the 54 decision, and it won, but if without the legal decision of 54, it would have been a Montgomery victory. But with the legal decision of 56, it became a national victory. That's what. Now, all the rest of our struggles, the 57 Little Rock decision was a reaction to a testing of Linda Brown's case. The sit-ins was a testing of Linda Brown's case. And all the cases since 54 have been, and we won all those cases since 54 led by a 9-year-old girl. I hope I'm making sense to you.
You're making sense.
And my last point is that you say, where do we go from here? Here to me is, before we go, here is Memphis, 64% African American. Poverty, 34%. With people making less than $10 an hour. I asked the servants here tonight how much money they make. They make $9 an hour here at this place tonight. Here. Memphis, 64% black, 9% of the 6% of the city contracts are African American. That's the here. 54% of African Americans tonight make less than $15 an hour, and the others are debt slaves, which means that unless we deal with the structural crisis of our own poverty, and if Montgomery was a test case around buses and Birmingham around civil rights, public, why can't Memphis be the test case around poverty? What we've learned is that you have to start somewhere. Given the dynamics of.
Excuse me. I hear a lot of noise out there.
That's right.
I hear a lot of. No, excuse me. I hear a lot of noise out there. You know who this man is talking. You know what this is? Why we are here? Now I came all the way from warm California. I don't need to be here and listen to all this. Please give the man the respect.
Thank you. And that's from the great Clarence Jones. And for those of you who are here, this is not about a party. This is about marking history and listening to history to understand what happened and what happened then, what's going on now, and the future. So if you want to party, you can go outside, but we are marking a historic moment. 50 years of the death, the assassination, the brutal assassination of a man who helped us get into this building, because if it were not for him, we would not be able to be in this building or sleep in some of these nice hotels and party in some of these hotels this weekend that we are now going, Reverend Jackson.
Well, I'm saying that Rosa Parks was a reaction to the Thurgood Marshall, Linda Brown case of 54. Dr. King, a reaction to Rosa Parks sitting in. And so to leave Linda Brown and Thurgood Marshall out of the conversation is to miss the context of which Dr. King flowed. I repeat again, if we had won the 55 boycott and had lost the 56 legal decision, it would have been a local boycott. But because we won, because it verified, certified the 54 decision, it was national. And all those cases that we were in my generation, whether fiscally and all the rest of our stuff, was a reaction. Our foundation, our legal foundation was Linda. There have been 3 legal foundations, it seems to me. One is the Emancipation Proclamation. which I think we underestimate. 2, the 13th Amendment, which is to the right of the Emancipation Proclamation. The third one is the 54th decision. Lyndon Brown is a huge, huge factor. Bigger, I think, than we estimate. The Thurgood Marshall and Lyndon Brown deserve a bigger sense of our consciousness in this deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson, for your words. As we understand what you're saying from the past and trying to move the ball forward to bring people together, people, not just men, not just black, not just white, but women, and people of religions that are not necessarily Christianity. And Tamika, I'm gonna come to you right now. My sister, you are in the news because of your efforts to bring the table together of all the leaders. Talk to me about the struggle that you're facing and how we can move the ball forward to get people to understand it's not just one group, it's all groups.
Right. Well, thank you. Can you all hear me? Great. Thank you so much, my friend April. And
We need to turn the mic up for Tamika Mallory.
Hello, 1, 2, 3. Great. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
All right. I'm a protester, so I can talk loud. And thank you again, April, my friend, and to all those who have us here today. And I am really, really honored to be sitting on this stage with Reverend Jackson and Mr. Jones and all those who are here and friends. This is an incredible moment in our history. We see all that is happening in terms of the different people who are working together and coming together and trying to find common goals and common reasons to stand together. And this whole idea that Kimberly Crenshaw has sort of coined around intersectionality is sort of what we have adopted, the Women's March and other organizations and groups in just this moment, where we basically say, and she said, that sexism and ableism and xenophobia and Islamophobia and racism and all those issues do not act independently of each other. They all are happening sometimes to the same communities at the same exact time. There are people who are dealing with multiple issues at once. And if in fact we know that is the case, why would we not have a movement that allows all of those people to come to the table? And so with the Women's March on Washington, with 5 million people marching worldwide, it was really difficult to do that, especially for me as a woman who has been engaged in the criminal justice struggle, particularly for many, many years, to have people asking, why do we have to talk about race when we're talking about women's issues? What is the reason for that? Why do we need to talk about police brutality and other issues when really all I'm trying to do is get my right to have an abortion, my right to choose? And we had to push back on that because obviously we know that if we do not look at all of our issues through a racial lens, we'll miss the mark. That we have to be able to understand that no matter what the issue on the table may be, people of color, particularly black people and black women, are at the bottom in terms of that struggle. And in order to push that conversation forward, we had to build a table that allowed people from the environmental justice movement to come together with the reproductive rights folks. We had to get people from the police brutality movement to understand that it's not just your issue alone, but that there are other issues within the criminal justice system, like immigration, that also matter. And so that is how we began to build this larger table, because in the very beginning, I would love to have had a march that was just about fighting back against things that we saw happen with Eric Garner and, with Sandra Bland and the names, the list goes on and on. But that would not bring 5 million people across the world together. And so since we have built this intersectional movement, and certainly it was for one day, there was a great moment in history that we saw happen. The rubber meets the road, and it gets messy when you start doing the real work after the march is over. And I think that that is sort of where we are now, is looking at intersectionality and saying to people, intersectionality doesn't mean that we only fight when you're comfortable. You may have to actually sit at the table with people you don't like, people who you don't agree with anything that they're saying, but we have common goals and common reasons for us to sit down together and try to build this movement. And that has been a struggle, but we continue to do it. And I think that because of this climate, this political climate that we're in, we actually have that opportunity because everyone is running scared and they are really suffering with the pain of understanding that we're in this hell together. And so we have folks that never understood. They had no idea of what this struggle looked like. And they're coming to the table now. And what I've been saying to them is, welcome to our world. You know, thank you. You are now invited to our table. And, you know, particularly for white women, it has been a challenge for us to bring these very difficult conversations to them and ask them to confront their own white womanhood issues in the midst of this struggle. That you cannot be a good ally, a strong ally, without looking at how you perpetuate the same systems of oppression against our people and against people of color. And so it's not easy work, but it is work that I think people are prepared to do today because they see that we have a fool in chief that is running the White House and running what is happening in this country, and they are all saying, right now, in this moment, I have to come to the table and be able to confront my own issues in order to be able to stand with others.
Well said, Tamika. Mr. Jones, okay, so when I look back at Dr. King, he talked with and worked with, and we don't know a lot about this because people don't talk about this a lot. We hear about him working with Medgar Evers. We hear about him working with using the philosophy of Gandhi and working also, well, he at least had a conversation with Malcolm X. He had the idea of intersectionality long before we even thought about a global society. How important is it today for that intersectionality to really be at the table and on the table and be part of the menu, the recipe for what we use with this blueprint that we're seeing our young people pick up now in Parkland and beyond?
I think one of the most important enduring mandates from the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. is we have to pause a little bit and pay a little bit more attention to facts. Huh?
No fake news.
Facts, F-A-C-T-S. Okay. And we have to do that, look at facts within the prism of the history of how we got to be where we are today. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. was a compassionate, loving person, committed to Gandhi, to nonviolence, and so forth. And we should, in his spirit, have the discipline and commitment to nonviolence. But that doesn't mean we should also have amnesia, okay? And amnesia is part of taking the time to study facts. For example, this is the 50th anniversary, all right? I don't know why former President Bill Clinton and former President Barack Obama, I love the brother, okay? Why have they not been here? Don't tell me somebody sent a video. Come on, Clarence. Don't tell me somebody sent a statement. Come on, Clarence. Okay? We have got to start being honest about facts. Yeah. Okay? Now that is simply a fact. They're not here.
All right, I want to stop you one second.
Listen.
What about this president? He's the policymaker. Do you put an onus on him as well, on this president?
Hold on. No. That's not what I'm saying.
I get you.
No, no,
But
no,
he's
no.
the
I'm glad you said
policymaker at this
no,
moment.
No. You know, excuse me. That's not what I'm saying. I'm simply saying we can't have amnesia about dealing with the reality of our experience. And the reality of our experience, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Linda Brown, all of the Brown versus Board of Education, those are powerful things that occurred. What they did over the past 50 years is extraordinary. And the fact that we're here to celebrate the legacy of this particular person that I was honored to work with sometimes 24/7, 7.5 years, that's one thing. But I could not, but I'm simply saying studying facts, that's a fact that we have to not forget. Now, the other reason I'm saying we have to study facts is that how did we get to be like we are today? We got to be like we are today because of the legacy of slavery. You understand what I'm saying? So somebody said to me, well, not every white person in America is a racist. No, actually said not every white man, as the question was, is a racist. And I said, no, but I say I operate on the historical presumption, okay? Until proven otherwise, based upon the history of what I've seen in this country, is be an exception for any white male in this country not to have racism and put it into himself. That doesn't mean I'm calling every white person a racist. I'm just dealing with the reality. The reality is, if you white in America today, okay, you wake up in the morning and you have something called white skin. Some people call it a privilege. Some people call it a liability. I say it's a fact that we have to remember and put it into historical circumstances. Now, how is this related to why we are today? Is that we dare not sit and have platitudes about Martin King was this and Martin King was that, unless you understand the reality of not only what this man achieved. He sought to redeem the soul of America, as we all know. I know I'm preaching to the choir. The March on Washington speech, his famous I Have a Dream speech, that was just a call to the conscience of America, okay? I'm saying that today, as we sit here honoring his legacy of 50 years, that we have a responsibility, particularly to the young people, to maybe get them to look at things as I believe he would have looked at them, presumptively. And I don't want to take too much time, except I was fortunate. The firm I was with, I represented James Baldwin, not his own little lawyer, but I was James Baldwin's lawyer. And as a course of that, I had spent a lot of time talking to Jimmy. And one of the things that was so profound about my conversation with Jimmy, he would say, you know, Clarence, he said, you know, Negroes, black people are extraordinary people. I said, I know that. I know, Jimmy. He said, no, you don't understand. He said, we are the most extraordinary people in the history, in all of human history. I said, well, Jimmy, that's a little deep now. He said, the reason I say that is that we as a people have such deep capacity to love, to care and forgive. Because what other people on the face of the earth, he would say, would have 240 years of slavery, be enslaved and still have the capacity to love your slave master. What makes me do that? That's why we are extraordinary people. So when I say, getting back to facts, that's my shorthand way of saying, evaluating the history of what happened here 50 years ago until where we are today, and recognizing that Dr. King was a leader of a movement that involved many people of less well-known names. You know the name Abernathy, and you know the name of Jesse Jackson and so forth, but you may not know the name of James Orange, you know? You know the name of James Bevel, of course, but you may not know the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson, or maybe you do, you may not know all of those men and women who tirelessly worked to make Dr. King's leadership of the movement to have its success. It wasn't successful because he was a great orator. It was a success because of the courage of Anita Boynton walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Right, that's right.
Okay? It was a success. Where's my success is because of Diane Nash.
Yeah.
Okay? And this icon here, James Lawson. Okay? And that man sitting right there, you know why the Democratic Party got representation before they didn't have it before? Okay? Because of his 1984, because of his election campaign. Jesse Jackson's 1984 and 1988 presidential campaign scared the living bejesus off of the political establishment. Scared that they didn't believe it. Didn't believe it. And so, we have a responsibility to talk facts and reality. And I'm sorry if I came down very hard, but I really feel this. I feel very pained. I personally feel pained. I can't speak for anybody else. I'm not speaking for the civil rights movement. I don't pretend to speak for Martin Luther King Jr. I'm saying Clarence B. Jones, from the road that I traveled with this man, Martin Luther King Jr., and with Jesse Jackson and others, I can't compute. Oh my God, Barack Obama wouldn't have been president but for the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Would not have been president. Now, if you think I'm thinking so harsh, fine. But somebody's got to tell you that is a fact. That's not fake news. That's not fake news. If somebody wants to offer me a rebuttal, say, oh, Obama would have been president, without the work of Martin Luther King Jr. No. He himself said it. I'm with him in the White House, graciously taking a picture with him, and he's grabbed my hand, and he said, but for you, John Lewis, C.T. Vivian Nameston, I would not be in this Oval Office. So, my brother, where are you?
Okay, on that note, I just have a factoid from Roland Martin, who had lunch with the president for the State of the Union. Okay, yes. Roland said the president told him that this president, Donald J. Trump, the day of the State of the Union, when he meets with all the anchors, that he was supposed to be here, right? He said to you he was going to be here. That's from Roland Martin. So, but we did see a video. The president did offer a video. It was on Twitter today. All right, so moving on. Moving on. Let's talk about that. The intersectionality, Quentin. The intersectionality, trying to get people from all races, all cultures, all genders, all walks of life to understand that there's still an issue. I talked to Mary Frances Berry, the former head of the U.S. Commission of Civil Rights. She said, and let's talk about social media and this intersectionality. Mary Frances Berry said, social media, particularly Twitter, is a great vehicle to organize, but it does not replace the red bottoms scraping on pavement. What do you say to that?
Well, first, it is such an honor to be on the stage. Again, my name is Quentin James, and I would be remiss if I didn't start by saying thank you to all the heroes and sheroes in this room, but particularly to one person on the stage, and that is Reverend Jackson. I am from Greenville, South Carolina, and I grew up attending libraries and high schools that you directly help integrate. And so thank you, sir, for your sacrifice and for allowing me to flourish in this nation for the work that you did. So thank you. So I run an organization called The Collective, and we work to build black political power.
Hello.
We define power as organized people and organized money. Unfortunately, right now in our country, 50 years after the tragic assassination of Dr. King, 90% of people who serve in public office in this country are white. 95% of our elected prosecutors who have skyrocketed the incarceration of black and brown bodies are white. And Democrats and Republicans both have a horrible record of supporting black candidates, because for both parties, over 80% of their candidates are also white. And so I ask folks in this room tonight, those of you who may be residents here in Shelby County, those of you who may be residents of Memphis, why is it that in a majority black county, in a majority black city, do we not have countywide or citywide black elected leadership 50 years after the assassination of Dr. King? So to your point, Dr. Jones, one of the last things Barack Obama told my generation in his farewell address is stop complaining, pick up a clipboard and run for office. Well, guess what? This year we have a record number of African Americans running for statewide and in federal office. But the challenge is no one's there to support them, right?
Go ahead.
It costs $1.5 million to run for Congress.
When you say no one's going to support them, let's quantify. Blacks, whites, what are you talking about? Mainstream or everyone all together? Who's not going to support them?
No one is supporting them, right? So the reason my organization exists is because we were hearing from folks all around the country saying, hey, I was told to run for office, I'm running, but I don't have the resources, I don't have the training, I don't have the networks. And so we're out building this network to support candidates, following again in the legacy of the folks who are sitting on the stage, whose work was to make our nation be a rainbow coalition politically. And so if we want to talk about the future and where we go from here, we got to realize that a whole generation in this world, I'll give an example, right? So Dr. King talked about a world house and how we all live together in this house. But the reality is black and brown people and young people are in the basement with poison water and Flint, right? With no electricity. And folks living on the third floor, living great off the backs of poor folks, off the backs of people of color. We can't talk about moving forward together, intersectionality, if we don't realize that everyone is not at the table equally.
That's right.
And so my mission is to carry forth this legacy of so many folks who have spoken tonight, spoken today, and to do the work to make sure that if you want to be the next Barack Obama, you don't have to depend on other folks from outside of your community to fund your campaigns. All right? If you want to be the next person elected to office in your community, that you will have a support network to make sure that you can be successful.
Go ahead, brother.
And so if we want to not only agitate and not only organize, but legislate this change that we all want to see, we have to have folks who look like us, who come from our communities to serve in public office. And so again, I'm so excited to be here for this momentous occasion, but to tell you all that the work is not done. Right here in Memphis, right here in Shelby County, we have unique opportunities to elect the first African-American clerk of Shelby County, the first African-American mayor of Shelby County. We can do that this year, right now. It does not take us waiting 50 more years to accomplish the goals Dr. King set out for us to do.
Thank you, Quentin. I want to go to Gina Belafonte. Gina, your dad marched. Your dad laid on those pallets in the South with Reverend Jackson and Congressman John Lewis, and now you're carrying the mantle. Talk to me about the intersectionality. How can we take Dr. King's message and bridge that divide? We were singing love. Is it about love? Is that how you get everyone to the table? Is it about love, or what is it about, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, what I would like to do is to have everybody in this room, in this moment, all together, to take a deep breath. Shall we? On three, 1, 2, 3. Thank you. I just need to like sort of ground myself in this moment and acknowledge that we are all here together. And the capacity of what just sits in this room alone, in your own individual ways, can be organized and put to good use and good work. And I hope that you all find ways in which to activate yourselves to do that. Okay, love. I'm a big proponent of that. I think that love is the answer. We have poems, we have songs, we have philosophers and scripts that talk about love and unity. I think what's deeply, deeply troubling is that we all seem to know what needs to be done, but we just don't seem to really know how to do it. And really how to come together, to break the silos, to really call a thing, to really access relationships with one another, and to really walk the talk that we preach to so many people. A lot of us are rising up, a lot of us are getting access, a lot of us are getting an opportunity, and we're carrying forward so much history from our own personal legacies, and from our community's legacies, and from the legacies from all of the people and the history that we share. But we don't really still know how to achieve the goals. Every single battle that was fought in the civil rights movement was won. The battles that we have now are not the same. So when we won the right to vote, we really didn't know how to educate enough people on why that mattered. And not only now could we vote, but how do we galvanize a community to create leadership that can step into roles that we feel comfortable to vote for? I think a lot of people in this country don't vote because they don't see people who are stepping up to the plate that will answer the questions and the needs that they're suffering from. So I think love certainly is an answer to a lot of issues, and if it was that simple, then I think we would have won already. But I don't think everyone sees love in the same way.
That's true.
And I think that some of the most important things I think that we can do is really come together to find solutions to these new systemic issues and problems. Because, again, I think that with all of the history that we have to look at and the roadmap that was made and the tools that have been given to us, we have the tools. We just have not been able to figure out how to build the mechanism that will tear down the supremacy, that will tear down the hate, that will tear down and shift the narrative around hope and love and the way in which we can really work in a beloved community. So I will just say a few other things, which is I was 11 years old when Shirley Chisholm ran for president.
1972.
That's right. And my mother, Russian-Lithuanian Jewish white chick from the Lower West Side of New York, became one of her delegates. And my mother took me out into the street to campaign. She had me licking stamps and envelopes because that's what we did in those days. We actually had to lick the stamp or get a sponge to wet it and put it on. And so I, at a very early age, was able to not only understand the power of organizing, but then also the power of intersectionality in terms of a woman's movement, elevating a black woman, and showing the nation that people have a voice. And so this was part of my indoctrination into activism. A lot of people think it was, and certainly is, a big part of my journey, but is my father's activism. And so I think one of the things that we need to uplift more and more in our civil rights histories and on our daises as we speak is the role that women have played in the history of the liberation of the world, not just of America. So when you talk to me about intersectionality, I think about how we need to integrate our stories and our female stories and our feminine stories and our goddess stories, and how we can elevate the consciousness of how women move through the world and the feminine essence, because I think women will lead us to the promised land, and that we have the answer to so many of the ills that we face, but we need to really step up and reclaim our space.
Yeah. And with that, I think about Shirley Chisholm. It's a saying that I love that she said, and it's, if you have any kind of dis-ease, you know, you want things done, she said, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, and that's for men and women. And I guess, Reverend Jackson, if you have enough of a dis-ease, you'll be like Fannie Lou saying, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. So with that, Yadon, you're a writer. What do you assess? What do you see as it relates to the intersectionality today versus yesterday? I mean, we are a different nation in 2018.
Right.
We can touch people in China like that just by social media or by the phone.
Yeah. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I think one of the things as a writer I've learned about is how much time it gives you to critically process and interrogate things that happens. And a lot of times we underestimate like how important it is to have space and time to look at a situation and analyze it. One of the things that poverty does is it takes your time and it makes it other people's. So to be able to sit back and look at your situation holistically and go, how is my story connected to another story that's connected to another story? That requires time, that requires space. As a writer, my job is to literally create my time to be able to take these stories and to weave them in a way where there is intersectionality. So one of the thing I do is called literary swag. It's this intersection of fashion and literature to make books more accessible to people who don't read. I grew up in Bed-Stuy, like in the 90s, where I would walk around with my books and people would come and smack my books out of my hand and be like, get out of here, you ain't reading. And so I used to have to hide like the books I had. And we're talking about a legacy where 100 years ago, I could get my fingers cut off, my feet cut off, my eyes plucked out for having books. And now, in a weird internalized sense, it's now just as dangerous to carry around books. So as a writer, for me, the thing that social media allows us to do is it allows us in a way like never before to come across so many words. There's so many people who will tell me to my face, I don't read as much, but then open a phone and start reading a text message. And so a lot of what I've had to do is mobilize them and show them, no, this is not something you have to start over. You're already doing it, but you have to activate the fact that you're doing it. And so as a writer, the thing I try to do is bring these narratives to people's front door. A lot of people, and when I think about like the legacy of King, King's legacy was also one of literacy. You don't have the letter of Birmingham jail if the man didn't know how to read and write, right? So there's so much that goes unsaid about the importance of us not only understanding our narratives, but being able to connect narratives to others. And so as a writer, when I do literary swag, it's how can I create a movement that presents intelligence in a way that people are lining up at a bookstore the way they line up for a new pair of Jordans? How do I create a movement where people like stunt on you with a first edition novel the way they would stunt on you with a pair of Yeezys? And that requires a whole different cultural framework We're valuing what we put in our minds as much as what we put on our bodies. And I'm from a neighborhood where people were getting robbed for like Vans and jackets, for Jordans, people were getting killed. But the other side of it were people were willing to die for it, right? And then there was that narrative of like people not valuing their lives to die for their Jordans. It wasn't that they didn't value their lives, it's that the way they communicated their value was through things. One of the main consistent things that people said today and throughout this week that I've been here is that we look at people like things.
Yeah.
And so part of what writing does is it helps you shift the narrative of what you focus on. It's how do we shift our narrative from things to people?
Hello.
That requires a cultural literacy, it requires an emotional intelligence, and it requires a space and time to do that. So a lot of what writing does for me and a lot of what the movement does for people is it tells them to reclaim their time. That when you're spending a lot of time worrying about how you're going to survive, it's how do you interrogate, how did I get in a position where I only worry about surviving? How do I get into a position where I'm able to actively live? And writing is my way of doing that. It's a way of actively reclaiming the narratives that's been separated from me, to look across stories and go, oh, these stories are the same. They're parallels. We might not meet like in the immediate way, but through these stories. And it's like I've never met King and I've never met a lot of these people before I got on the stage. But when you read these narratives, you're seeing these touchstones and you're like, oh, this is connected. And I think that the last point, when I went to the museum yesterday, the thing that stuck out to me most was the night, like hours before King was assassinated, he had a pillow fight. Like you have to think about that moment of just genuine joy, unprecipitated by like the impending danger that was coming. And so much of what writing is about and what made me a writer is the ability to focus on the small moments of life that we don't get to think about because we fight in these big battles. But a lot of what King was fighting for was the small moments in which people could embrace their families and not have to worry about these large things coming on the horizon. So as a writer, everything that I advocate for is like create and reclaim space and time to investigate your lives and connect narratives.
Thank you. Okay. They're saying we have to wrap it. I got to give Reverend Jackson. Go ahead, Reverend Jackson, really fast.
I want to make a point. One is that when SNCC began in
Can't hear Reverend Jackson.
SNCC began in 1960. Dr. King sent $5,000 to help get off the ground. He did not feel threatened by SNCC. He enhanced it. Dr. King was killed. I was 26. Ann was 36. He was 39. I was the baby in the group. They were bringing me along. James Bevel and Bernard Lafayette embraced me a year or two older and brought me into a process where I didn't have to start from point zero. I learned from Bevel. I learned from Jim Lawson. Jim was my teacher too. And so that's something said about disconnect. The second piece of it is that beware that sin is deeper than skin. Do you want Clarence Thomas to be your chief of Supreme Court? Or would you rather have Warren as the chief of Supreme Court? Last Thursday, an article in the New York Times, headed by Ben Carson, wants to remove from the mission of HUD the word discrimination. In the name of black love, he said black people should live next to each other, not be bothered with living next to white people. That's stacking and packing political districts in the name of black love. That's real slick talk, y'all. But my last point is that there are 4 million high school, Jamaica, there are 4 million high school seniors eligible to register and vote this year. There are more 17 and 18-year-olds than there are 71 and 81-year-olds. There are 4 million blacks in the South unregistered. 2.5 million who were registered who did not vote the last time. Now that gets down to some hard cotton picking. That gets down to right down there. It doesn't make sense to have a high school where a black principal has a senior class of 300 students and does not convene them and register them to vote. You back to your thing about how to. how to involve them. I repeat, 4 million. I went to high school a month ago, 753 seniors. They let me speak to 30 of them. School's half Hispanic, and they're fighting for DACA with 700 students there who are voters, and the president would not let them. I'm making sense to y'all? The how-tos. So beware of this sin skin thing, because I've seen in my lifetime, I've had to judge people by how much sense they made, not just by what color they are. People can set you up on that. Don't get set up on just color.
With that, everyone has a story. Reverend Jesse Jackson, Tamika Mallory, Yadon Israel, Quentin James, and Clarence Jones, and Gina Belafonte. Let's give them all a big round of applause. Thank you so much for staying. We know the hour is late. Everyone has a story. This is a remarkable, remarkable day and event, the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The dream is still alive. And guys, thank you for having me. April Ryan, White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Networks. I'll see you on CNN. Bye.
Folks, that is it. This has been, of course, an amazing evening of storytelling here at Crosstown here in Memphis. I mean, think about what you heard tonight. And when you think about the sheer brilliance of Reverend Jim Lawson, Clarence Jones, Reverend Jackson, Congressman John Lewis, Marion Wright Edelman, Tamika Mallory, I can go on and on and on. I've seen a lot of your comments on Periscope, YouTube, and Facebook. That you have appreciated this very much like we have as well. And so it's been great. It's been great. It has been an unbelievable 3 days. Of course, we started this thing on Monday with our live stream. You can go back and look at all of our channels, look at all the archive stuff. And again, we've had some stunning coverage here. So the entertainment here, they're singing Glory. So I'm going to go back to the program there. I'm going to go back to the program, back to the stage as they perform Glory.
When the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, glory, glory, oh, glory, glory. One day, when the glory comes, it'll be ours, it'll be ours. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, glory, glory, glory.
Listen, it goes hands to the heavens, no man or no weapons formed against, yes, glory is destined. Every day women and men become legends. Sins that go against our skin become blessings. The movement is a rhythm to us. Freedom is like religion to us, yeah. Justice is juxtaposition in us. Justice for all, just ain't specific enough. One son died, his spirit is revisiting us. True and living in us. Resistance is us. That's why Rosa sat on that bus, yeah. That's why we walk through Ferguson with our hands up. When it goes down, we woman and man up. They tell us stand down, but we stand up. Shots we on the ground and the camera panned up. King pointed to that mountaintop and we ran up like
one day.
That's right, that's right.
When the glory comes, it'll be ours, it'll be ours. Victory isn't won, but fight on to the finish. Then when it's all done, we'll cry glory, oh glory, oh
I told them that this is that for every man, woman, and child. Even Jesus got his crown in front of a crowd. They march with the torch, we gon' run with it now. Never looking back, we done gone hundreds of miles. From dark roads, heroes to become a hero. Facing the League of Justice, his power was the big ball. Enemy is legal, the king became legal. Saw the face of Jim Crow under a bald eagle. No man can win this war individually. And take the wisdom of the elderly and young people's energy. Listen to the story we call victory. The coming of the Lord, my eyes have seen the glory. Say,
the war is not over.
That's right.
Victory isn't won, but fight on to the finish. Then when it's all done, we'll cry glory, oh glory, oh glory. One day.
Evie McKinney. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the National Civil Rights Museum, thank you for joining us for this MLK 50 event. Have a safe trip home this evening, and if you live here, enjoy your elevator ride. Good night.
Well, again, folks, that closes out all of the MLK 50 activities. There might be some things happening tomorrow, but pretty much this is it. We started this on Monday with the various symposiums with the University of Memphis Law School at the Peabody Hotel. Eric Holder, former Attorney General, of course, he spoke on Monday with the keynote. Then, of course, we had more symposiums taking place on Tuesday with Taylor Branch giving the luncheon speech. And then, of course, last night we were at Mason Temple where AFSCME and Kojic where they, of course, had the event that focused on the April 3rd, 1960 top speech of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We heard from Bernice King, Martin Luther King III. We heard from so many other folks as well. Then, of course, today, 9 hours at the National Civil Rights Museum, the program they're commemorating the day, of course, when Dr. King was assassinated 50 years ago. And then, of course, we had this event tonight. Here's something that we have to consider and understand. This is really the last major civil rights event. When you think back to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, of course, you had that commemoration. You had, of course, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom 50 years later. Of course, you also had the Voting Rights Act in 1965. You look at all of those Bloody Sunday, Selma 50, all of those different events. This really is the last one. We're likely not going to have this sort of mass event until you have the 75th. You have to keep this in perspective. And it's not to be morbid, but the reality is Reverend Jackson on that stage was the youngest person at 76. You had Clarence Jones, who's 87 years old, Harry Belafonte, 91 years old, Diane Nash, 79 years old. The folks you saw tonight, when we have the 75th anniversary, they're not going to be with us. And so for us to be able to hear from them, to soak up what they have to say, is critically important, which is one of the reasons why we spent the time and spent the money, spending my personal money, not TV One, my money, traveling this nation, gathering these stories. And so over the next several weeks, we're going to have these one-hour stories, and we're going to live streaming them. And you'll hear from Juanita Abernathy, the widow of Ralph Abernathy. You're going to hear from Sonona Clayton, saying things that she said she's rarely discussed publicly in 50 years. You're going to hear us talking to Reverend C.T. Vivian, him talking about when he was almost drowned by a cop in the ocean in St. Augustine, and the first thing he did was laugh. You're going to hear Ambassador Andrew Young tell his story, Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. tell his story, Clarence Jones, Claiborne Carson. You're going to hear all of these stories because they matter. These are our icons. These are our legends. And Clarence said something, you know what? He's right. The reality is, President Obama should have been here. He wasn't here for the 40th. He should have been here today because of what I just said. That these leaders, Bernard Lafayette, Bill Lucy, this will be the last significant gathering where you will see and have all these people in one place. And so, yeah, and I don't want to hear people say, oh, Roland, you're being too critical. No, because sometimes you got to come and pay respects, even if you are former president. So, yeah, he should have been here. He should have been here for one day. And so it needed to be said. And it doesn't matter if folks disagree with it. Sometimes you got to say the uncomfortable truth. And so the challenge now for us is what do we do after April 4th? See, the thing for us tomorrow is no different than what happened. In fact, when we talked to Reverend Jim Lawson and Andrew Young, this is what they said. They literally met in Dr. King's hotel room on the night of April 4th. And they said, we decided we were going to continue. If they could make that decision hours after watching Dr. King be killed, if they could make that decision to move forward with the Poor People's Campaign, to move forward with all the initiatives, then how dare any of us say we can't do it? So the challenge for every single one of you is what are you going to do now? What are you going to do beginning tomorrow? Mary Wright Edelman, Bernard Lafayette, all those folks, they put the time in. They put the work in. Now it's time for this generation. And so when we have the 75th anniversary, I want y'all to think about this here. The 75th anniversary commemorating Dr. King's assassination will be 2043, which will be the year where America will no longer be a majority white country. And so what will we do over the next 25 years? Will we be having the same conversations in 2043 that we were having in 2018? That's really the question that we have to ask ourselves, which means that think about it this way. That the next generation of young African Americans will be born between now and the next 4 years. The next generation. A child born between now and the next 4 years will be between 21 and 25 years old by 2043. And so anyone watching, no one will be able to say, well, what did Reverend Jackson do and what did Andrew Young do? No, they're going to say, what did you do? What did I do? Because, see, now the onus is on us. Now the onus is on us to write our own story, to write our own history, to tell our own story. Will we come back 25 years from now talking about what they did and completely skip over the past 25 years? That is the challenge that all of us have. And if you have not gotten the book, if you have not read it, you should. That is, where do we go from here, Chaos or Community? Everything that I'm talking about, Dr. King laid out, where he challenged black newspapers, the black press, he challenged black fraternities, he challenged sororities, he challenged civil rights leaders, he challenged pastors. He laid out a course of action that we should have been following the last 50 years. A lot of us didn't. And so now we should be. So now it's incumbent upon us to do our part, to step up, to speak out, to register folks, to take them to the polls, to maximize our power, because if we don't, all we've done is come here for an event and ate some food and heard some music and heard some speeches, and it didn't mean a damn thing. Now the question that you have to answer after all of this is, what are you prepared to do? So I want to thank all the folks, of course, who made this possible. Of course, folks at TV One, also all of our producers and camera folks and everyone else who made this possible. It has been a very busy last several weeks pulling this whole thing off. We hope you've enjoyed it. I've already seen the numbers collectively over the 3 days. We've surpassed 500,000 views over the past 3 days. We had 400,000 views just today alone. And so we thank all of you who've been with us all day and all week as well. Stay tuned by, of course, follow me on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, as well as Facebook for the updates. As I said, we're putting together all those interviews, and we're having those 1 hour interviews for you to be able to see and experience as well. And so it's time for us to go. signing off from Memphis. Don't forget, you also need to support the National Civil Rights Museum. So go to the website and support them as well, because that is a living museum. They need your dollars and your resources as well. And so again, also subscribe to my YouTube channel. We want to hit 200,000 subscribers. We want you to, of course, go youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. Again, Roland S. Martin on Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat as well. And of course, follow us on Facebook. And so we got to go, folks. We shall see you tomorrow. We'll be leaving here. I'll be in New York, head to a Black Media Summit on Friday, and I'll share those details with you. All of the stuff we have will also be available via podcast, so go to iTunes and subscribe to the Roland Martin Unfiltered podcast. So for everyone here in Memphis, we thank you so very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. I'm Roland Martin. Have a great night.
You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.
This is Diala Riddle, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered. Stay woke.
This is Director X, the director of Superfly on the red carpet, or the black carpet, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Yo, what up, y'all? This is Jay Ellis, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Hi, I'm Chaley Rose, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
I'm Lex Scott Davis, and you are watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy Jacob Lattimore, and you're now watching Roland Martin right now.
You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? The blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play.